last one for this session, I promise, and this one is about selecting sources. So just this is more of a refresher and talking about how it's applicable to this essay. We talked earlier in Unit 1 that about the fact that there are a lot of different ways to use sources, not just for evidence, typically our go-to, and a lot of times if we've learned how to like just build an argument, that's what we went for. Like, I just need evidence. Rather than thinking about there's lots of different ways to use a source, you might use it for knowledge building. A lot of times this is the stuff, again, that you're providing a reader just to give them context, and it can be like, a tertiary source. Sometimes it's secondary. It's often in the form of like, again, like things you're directly referencing, or it could be further reading, like links that you're not really talking about, but your reader can click on and go read more about it. Evidence for a point. This is our common like go-to, like this supports points. They're usually secondary, can be primary. Things that you're using like when you're like quoting from like experts and studies and statistics and things like that. You can use sources to illustrate a point, and this is the one that gets left out the most, and it's actually really important. It's part of helping to clarify things that you're talking about, giving people examples that they can visualize and have a frame of reference. Like, we think in comparisons, and a lot of times these are your stories and your firsthand accounts and like your current news and the things that help people, again, see the issue. We practiced a little bit of this in Studio 2. These are often primary sources, but sometimes they are tertiary, like graphs and things like that, things that help people see what you're talking about, not just prove what you're, prove your point, but help them understand better and visualize what you're talking about. Just like examples, and we typically like leave this out the most. So here's just some ideas. When you're picking sources, so when you're building background, think about, again, like just what your audience kind of needs. If you're talking about history and explaining terms, that's okay to use tertiary sources there, to think about your encyclopedias and timelines and histories and things like that. If your audience needs to see what the current debate is, again, like you have some of this from your annotated bibliography, and that's also kind of part of the goal there. You might need to get more creative with some visual tertiary sources like graphs, and you might have some like statistics or things from like primary sources like press conferences and current things and interviews and examples from like film and music that show the debate, that show the conversation that's happening right now. You might need both. Like, your reader might need to say, like, here's currently what's happening right now, here are the things that you need to understand. Like, your background might be a little bit bigger, but again, showing what's happening right now with this issue, that would be a point. Like, it's a background with a point. It's not just blanket information, so just be kind of aware of that. So here's some ideas for things you might do with that background section and picking sources. When you're building the other parts of your essay, think about focusing on combining primary and secondary sources, especially in those other body parts of the essay. So this is where you would typically use like graphs, scholarly experts, news reports, popular commentary, interviews, study results, lectures, documentary clips, blah, 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 blah. And this is where you're synthesizing. This is where you are really practicing pulling from lots of different sources that are connected in the conversation to make that point. And it's always stronger when you're just not talking, like trying to make a point and pulling from one source. When you're pulling and explaining from different places, like you have like an interview and you have an example from a social media feed and you have a quote from an expert, and you're pulling from lots of places and bringing it together and making that connection. And synthesis is a really difficult sometimes, but it's a really important critical reading skill, because it shows that ability to really pick apart and make connections and use your research. So here's a quick reflection you're going to do. This is pretty short. I do this in your notebook. You might go ahead and maybe put some of these ideas directly into your draft, and that's okay too. You could just make a note in your notebook that you did that, so I can go see it. But I want you to think about like a few sources of information that you found that fulfill each of these purposes. So like list out like knowledge building, evidence, illustration, and think about some like primary, secondary, and maybe even tertiary sources that you can use, that you can list and categorize. Like I can use these for, you know, background or to show what's going on now. I can use these, like these are my scholars and my studies that I might be able to pull from, and do some of that organization. So, you know, you're covering like different kinds of sources and thinking about some different uses. You know, this combined with Studio 4 will, you know, likely help you think about like what you can do with some of these sources to take them from just being sources to being like pieces you can put together and organize into your essay, and possibly help you with the drafting that you're going to do next. Peace.